Welcome to it, guys. Welcome to Upfront with Caz. We're live for this is our second episode today, and joining with me will be Colin Nathan. We call this Inside the Ring, where we discuss the fights that changed the course of history. So we'll be talking about Sugar Ray Leonard today. Last week we talked about Muhammad Ali, the greatest heavyweight of all time. Today we're talking about Sugar Ray Leonard. And what an awesome career he had. I'm just going to join Colin right now, so stay tuned. What's up, Lee? Welcome to the show, early. What's up, Colin Nathan? Viva!
Viva Caz, how you doing, brother?
I'm just watching the highlights of Sugar Ray, bro. And from the Olympics. Oh, yeah, the speed. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. How you doing?
Awesome. So welcome to Upfront with Caz, episode 2 of Inside the Ring. Joining me, the top coach in South Africa over the past 10 years. He's created lots of champions. Good friend of mine. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Colin Nathan. What's up?
Thanks for having me, Caz.
Southside. Okay, so last week we talked about Muhammad Ali, and it brought back so many memories. And so we decided we're going to keep this ongoing. And this week we're going to talk about Sugar Ray Leonard. And of course, Sugar was within our generation. Remember Sugar Ray Leonard's Golden Gloves and such. So let's go back to the beginning. I think it's only fair to go back to the Olympics. Where do you want to start from?
Well, I think what the boxing fans need to remember was that Leonard won the Olympics in Montreal in '76. And then obviously before that, he was being touted as something special. And he was a very, very shrewd operator and businessman when he decided to turn pro. He was smart enough to join Angelo Dundee, who at that stage was still training Muhammad Ali. And was obviously still kind of at the peak of his career, to the point where it was his last kind of reign as heavyweight champ and champion in that stage. But Leonard really was, if you think back to boxing history and you think about the first darling of the media besides Ali, you'd have to go to Sugar Ray Leonard, because he had the smile, he had the looks, he had the reflexes, and he had the speed to really, really capture the boxing world's imagination. And that's exactly what he did. So we discussed this off camera, you and I, that Leonard has to be my favorite fighter of all time. Just a very, very special athlete. And yeah, I mean, obviously he carried on way past his prime, and he made a stupid comeback in '97 against Hector Camacho and got stopped. But before that, let's start just talking about so I got my little 3-year-old daughter. Let's talk about his rise to stardom. Say hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Hey, baby.
I'm gonna have to go.
What's up?
No, ask my content, please. Okay, Daddy's busy. I'm busy. Sorry, guys. So guys, when he turned pro, there was a lot of expectation, and the expectation was gaining and following momentum of him winning the gold medal in '76. And obviously, I always say that if a fighter's got a good amateur base and he's done really well in the amateurs, that obviously bodes well for that fighter to do well as a professional. So the expectation was for Leonard to kind of take over from Ali, I want to say. And because he had the looks and the charisma and the style and really the fighting ability, he was the guy who took over from Ali. So if you go through his career,
more or less, how many amateur fights did Sugar Ray have? More or less, I'm not too clear on that.
well, I'm not particularly clear on how many, but I know he won numerous championships as an amateur, and to the point where I think he was actually kind of favored almost to win the Olympic gold in '76.
He created a repertoire.
But going back to his early career before he won the world title, he fought some really credible fighters. And notably, he also fought, a lot of people might not know this, he fought Floyd Mayweather Sr.,
Yes.
Floyd's father, and dropped him twice in the 8th round and stopped him in the 10th round. But that was also a really good standout victory for Leonard. And by the time he fought Wilfredo Benitez, it was, there was even more expectation because remember, Benitez was the youngest boxing champion in boxing history to win a world championship at the age of 17. What was interesting, going into the last round of that fight, Leonard was ahead, but he stuck his signature and authority on that fight by stopping Benitez in the last round. And that's when people stood up and took notice of Leonard because, like, okay, maybe he's a hype job, maybe he's not. But he proved tonight that he's not a hype job and that he could actually fight. And he proved that he could actually fight by stopping Wilfredo Benitez. And it was a great win for him at that stage of his career.
So at that stage of the career, his speed was incredible. His fitness was incredible as well. What do you think? What do you think the best part of his fighting game at that stage was? What got him that win, essentially?
I think Leonard is probably one of the most balanced fighters in boxing history. You just look at the way he moved and you say he had quick feet, but he just had tremendous base and tremendous feel for his base and fundamentals. He had great fundamentals, great technique, great speed, great jab, beautiful timing, combination puncher. And that's why I think he would have been too much for Floyd Mayweather Jr. That's another debate. That's another topic altogether, Caz. But I just think he just possessed everything. He could punch, he could box, he could counter, he could move off the back foot, he could attack on the front foot. Leonard, to me, was probably the most complete fighter
Mike,
that I've seen pretty much in my career.
do you know what was interesting? I was watching that Mike Tyson. You know, Mike Tyson's got that show, Hot Boxing with Tyson, and so he had Sugar Ray on the show, and he got so emotional. And Mike was like, he started crying talking to Sugar, talking about, do you know how you inspired me? And Mike was explaining from a fan perspective that every time Leonard would throw those punches, it would be like 2 pound punches that would sound like one because there was just so much speed going into it. It was amazing the speed. If you actually watch back those fights, the tempo and it was like amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
I think after that, I mean, we all know what happened in the first fight with Hands of Stone. But I mean, let's talk before then, because there were so many ups and downs. This career was just so full of comebacks and everything.
so he defended his championship several times, and then obviously the big money fight was Duran, um, in just trying to think again in Montreal, and Leonard was a heavy favorite going into that fight. And what's interesting though is that normally fighters move up single divisions, so they'll go from lightweight to junior welterweight and then to welterweight. Duran went from literally lightweight all the way up to welterweight. And the thing is that Duran was really hungry. He had arguably the best boxing trainer in boxing history, Ray Cell, in his corner that night. And he just out-hustled and he made Leonard fight his fights. Now, it's very important when you talk about Leonard that you can't not mention Duran. And it's obviously been on SuperSport. We've watched the No Mas documentary, where I don't think Duran was truly forthcoming towards the end of the documentary, where he gave another excuse and another excuse. I'm not taking anything away from Duran. I think he was a living legend, arguably the greatest lightweight in boxing history.
I mean, let's
But he
face it,
fought.
sorry to disturb you there, but what people need to realize is that before that fight, it's like Duran had trained his whole entire life, living out of squalor. I mean, just all he had was this fighting, this anger, and all these issues and demons within. And that fight was like the culmination of everything. So imagine going from a situation where you literally you don't know where your meal's going to come from. You go into the gym, you're hungry. And then this one fight changes everything, not only in your life, but in your whole family's life, you know?
And I think it's also important to note and remember that Duran only had one loss, which he avenged going into the fight with with Leonard. So although Leonard was favored to beat him and was a heavy favorite, you couldn't really count out Duran, particularly because of his record and because he was so ruthless in the ring. So going in, and I don't mean to repeat myself, but I just think Leonard got sucked into a macho fight. Mentally, Duran got to him before the fight. which he admits to. And I think he fought the wrong fight and obviously ended up losing a close decision. But Leonard being smart in the way he is, obviously there was kind of a rematch clause, or I'm assuming there was a rematch clause involved. Duran went out partying,
Yeah.
put on a lot of weight. The story goes is that he went up to like 200 pounds. And then obviously 6 months later, they got the rematch. Now, people can say that Duran mentally wasn't ready for it or wasn't in shape or, and again, if you look at the documentary on No Mas, everything was pointing to, I mean, we all know the result with Leonard beating him on an eighth round TKO with Duran turning his back saying no mas. But the attention was on Duran quitting, where I think the attention should have been on Leonard because of the tactics he employed. Now, you've been around me and I've been around you, and you know that boxing is very much a mental game, and it's all about having the right chess player with the right chess piece, making the right chess move. And Leonard, if you looked at the rematch, fought a completely different fight. He didn't lead. He waited for Duran to lead. It was almost like the bull versus matador.
Those angles.
And I think, here's what I think. Here's what I think. I think Duran probably was in good shape. I don't think he was as good in shape as he was in the first contest. I also know that, which I found out in the documentary, that he got paid before the fight $8 million. So did that soften him? I'm not sure. But I think he quit in that fight because he simply was frustrated. And he knew that Leonard wasn't going to be drawn into his fight game. And I think out of frustration, he turned his back and said, I've had enough. And I think we need to just understand how great Leonard was. Even though Duran might have not been in the best shape like he was in the first fight, Leonard played with him. And that just shows the brilliance of the boxing brain of a guy like Sugar Ray Leonard. And that's why when we were discussing this, obviously off camera, that we have to bring up Leonard because he's a very important part of boxing history. So many other champions are, but particularly him. So there were four kings, they always said. There was Leonard, Hearns, Duran, and Hagler. So with Leonard winning and reclaiming the welterweight championship, he obviously moved up in weight and fought Ayab Kululi for the WBA junior middleweight version. But obviously he took big breaks in between. He also had a detached retina, which a lot of boxing people don't know because a lot of the guys in new school.
Before we go to that other meaty stuff, I just want to close off on that Duran-Leonard fight. Because I want people to go back. If anyone's watching this, because I am going to edit and post this on YouTube, so eventually a lot more people will see this. Go back and watch the difference between the two fights. You're going to see in the first fight, Leonard was in that, he was in the middle. He just didn't want to give up. He wanted to tussle. And in the second fight, the mental was strong. He was moving. He was in, he was out. And funny enough, just quickly, after watching the second Ruiz-Joshua fight, yes, you can diss Joshua for not getting in the fight, but listen, if you were him, would you not have used the same tactics? He got fit, light, moved out, worked the jab, in and out. Ruiz had the same sort of approach. Well, this guy, why aren't you coming in to fight? Do you know what I'm saying? So, interesting.
And Ruiz was a lot bigger and heavier. So I'm one of those guys who, there's two things in boxing. You want to win and you want to look good. Yeah. The first prize is always to win. The second prize is to look good winning. So with Joshua winning, reclaiming the championship, I thought he put on a masterful performance. I thought it was just a great, great performance from him. So I'm one of those guys who could look at him and say, well, he did what he had to do. He adapted, he changed his tactics, and he won. And it's the same as with Leonard. Leonard didn't adopt this. He didn't fall into the trap of Duran, getting mauled on the inside and fight, And I think Duran knew that he was in for a very long night. He knew that Leonard wasn't going to engage, and he knew that he wasn't going to outbox him. Because Leonard decided to box off the back foot and wait for Duran to lead. And guys need to understand, this is boxing. It's not a street fight. And that's why boxing is probably one of the smartest sports in the world.
Yeah.
And for me, that's why I consider Leonard great, because he could adapt, adjust, and make it happen in the ring.
Yeah. I always talk about the sweet science of boxing. Some of the kids that come up to me and they ask me, why do you love boxing so much? I tell them a story about once when I was about 12 years old, and this kid named Jethro Marsh, who was a quiet guy, but he boxed at the community hall. And I was talking shit to him and everything else. He says, okay, we'll go home after school. I'm going to show you something. So he said to me, put your hands up. I was like, what are you talking about? He says, put your hands up. I don't want you to tell anybody that you lost a fight and I didn't give you a chance. Then he said to me, hit me. I'm like, I don't want to fight with you. But the ego got involved. I was like, oh, and so I tried to hit him and I missed. I tried to hit him again and I missed. As you see, the lesson there was, be careful when you run your mouth, because from that day, I became a lifelong scholar because of the sweet science. Because one punch you can throw and lose all your energy, all your confidence. It's about staying in the moment, being present. In fact, it's quite an enlightening experience to be there facing your fears. It's crazy. Anyway, over to you. Let's carry on with Leonard.
So there's a question by Matt Elisha, who's a friend of mine in Cape Town. He's asking us, what makes Leonard one of the greatest of all time?
Sure.
Well, when you beat great fighters, you become a great fighter. When you beat Duran, when you beat Leonard, when you beat Hearns, when you beat Hagler, that to me solidifies your greatness.
Dude, Hagler.
So, I mean, yeah, and you know what? Beating great fighters, also they were really great fighters.
It was a time.
So then, obviously,
it was a time when there was a few, like you said, the Four Kings. There was a time when there was a few great fighters at the same time. Not one like Carnelo, or just like running the scene. There were like a few. I remember listening to the Hagler Hearns, for example, over my granny's BBC radio, trying to tune in. I had like the wire connected. I had it plugged into the light switch. But anyway, it was like amazing times. But carry on talking about that, bro.
Yeah, so there's another question. Do I rate it better than Pac-Man? I think I'm going to come under a bit of controversy for saying this. I think Pac-Man potentially is probably one of the top 10 greatest fighters of all time. I think he had now listen to what I'm saying. I think he's had a far more illustrious career than Floyd Mayweather Jr. 8 division world champion and won linear championships in all of those divisions. So I don't want to get into the merits of who's, a better fighter. I mean, just because Pacquiao lost to Mayweather doesn't mean to say that he's not a greater fighter, just based on his history and what he's achieved. So let's move on. So he won the rematch, and then obviously he was plagued by detached retina, but he came back and he won the WBA junior middleweight version of beating Ayub Kululi, a Ugandan who was based in Denmark at the time. And then obviously he retired. He retired for, I think he was out for 3 or 4 years. And then there were always issues about his eye, blah, blah, blah. But he came back. He came back in 87 against Marvelous Marvin Hagler.
But I remember, just pause. Do you remember him ringside? There was a shot that caught him watching that fight with Hearns and Hagler. There was a fight, he was watching the fight before he made his comeback. And he was like, his eyes were like, yo, I gotta have a piece of this. You could just tell he was
so there's a few things. Remember, Leonard did color commentary for, I believe, HBO at the time as well. So they used him as a color commentator. And then the other thing is that he actually, if you read Leonard's book, he was out one night and he cornered Hagler. And he was talking to Hagler, and Hagler confided in him and he said, you know what, man, I'm tired of this boxing. I think I've had enough. And that's when he knew that Hagler's heart wasn't where it was supposed to be in the sport. And that's when he came out of retirement. Wow. Because if you look back in history, Hagler was always chasing the Leonard fight. And Leonard was always teasing him about having it. And then he waited right at the right moments. And that's why I think Leonard's just such a genius of a man. He waited at the right moments. And then he announced his comeback and went straight into a fight with Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Now, the rumor is that he had a fight behind closed doors just to kind of get a feel, which wasn't recorded. But going into that fight, no one gave him a chance. It was a very, 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 very huge upset in boxing in '87. And again, the people who always question that decision. I've watched that fight so many times, and I just think Leonard hustled his way through, had good vibrations, body language said it all, and he won the split decision. People think that Hagler got robbed. I'm one of those guys who don't think he got robbed. I think he won the fight, and I think he just won great ring generalship, great combination punching, and he stole rounds, Kaz. He stole rounds. He was smart the way he boxed and stole rounds.
You saw, I mean, that last 10 seconds where he would just come into it and throw a ton of punches.
So, the one fight that we've also left out, which we have to talk about, is the first Tommy Hearns fight, when Leonard was behind on all the 3 scores and came back in the 14th round and stopped Tommy Hearns. I mean, Tommy Hearns as well was just an absolutely amazing legend of a fighter. And for Leonard to turn it around when he was down, and you had Angelo Dundee screaming between the 13th and 14th round, son, you're blowing it, son. I mean, you could look at all the tapes, and you can go on YouTube and take a look. And for him to turn that fight around also just shows the level of greatness of the fighter, of the man, So fast track back to Hagler. So that caused, if Leonard just did the impossible, he came out of retirement, beat Hagler, what was left? What was left for him? So there was a few things left for him. He fought Donnie Lalonde in something which is still weird to my thoughts, is that he fought for the WBC super middleweight and light heavyweight championship on the same night. Now,
how does that work?
People in boxing know that you can't fight in 2 divisions in one night. You either way in it, but that was the power of Sugar Ray Leonard. He ended up stopping Lalonde. What was interesting, the time of the stoppage, 1 judge had him behind and 2 had him ahead, but Leonard got put over on his backside in the 4th round. But obviously, it's not where you start in boxing, it's where you end. After that, he had the draw with Tommy Hearns. A lot of people thought that he lost that fight. Leonard got dropped twice in that fight. So he escaped with a draw. And then, obviously, the 3rd rubber match with Duran. And, I mean, Leonard just had the formula on how to beat Duran. So it was really one-way traffic, and he won a unanimous decision. And then he made the error of fighting on too long against a young, fresh champion called Terry Norris. 1991, Madison Square Garden, Leonard coming down to junior middleweights, and obviously he thought at the time that he could, win the championship, dropping down a few divisions, which normally doesn't happen in boxing. Fighters don't normally drop down divisions. They normally go up. And he got dropped twice, and he lost a unanimous decision, and he, announced his retirement. Inexplicably, at the age of 40, he came back in 97 against Hector Camacho in Vegas. And, Camacho at the time was really viewed as an opponent, but Leonard was 40 years old. He was obviously tired. He'd had enough to a point. And I think it was just money and ego driving him. And it was a sad, sad fall for an iconic, great fighter who really didn't know when to let go. And he really got hammered. There was claims that he had a calf injury going in. His trainer at the time was Adrian Davis, who came out to South Africa twice with Eric Aiken and, of course, Hasim Rahman to pull off the monumental upset in 2001 against Lennox Lewis. So he had a good trainer in his corner. But Leonard it was a shell of himself, and he just never had it anymore. And it was a clear indication of he has a fighter that's just training on his name but shouldn't be fighting anymore. And it was really sad to see. And I went through that fight a few months ago, and it was just horrible to see that the fighter that I loved and adored actually came back to be that fighter. And it often happens when fighters just don't know when to let go. But all in all, I mean, one of the all-time boxing greats of boxing, Sugar Ray Leonard.
So that last fight, when I was watching it as well, also it was like a bit heartbreaking because it reminded me of the Ali fight against Holmes, like the last fight. It was like, it was just, but then what do? You're not that person. You're just the viewer, and everyone has got their journey. So before we come to a close, I want to talk about what you felt that Sugar Ray's the strongest qualities of his boxing game were.
He just had such good timing and what made Leonard was his balance. He just had phenomenal balance. his fundamentals were just so great. He just had such a good jab. His reflexes and combinations. I mean, as a fighter, he could just let his hands rip and go. And he had killer instinct. When he hurt one of his opponents, there was no letting up. He just knew how to finish a fight as well. And he just had everything. I mean, if there's one fight in my career that I would have loved to have trained, would be him.
Yes. So we'd like to welcome some of the other boxing fans in and some other professional boxers joining our show. 9 million, what's up, what's up? You know, here's my question as a strength and conditioning coach as well, someone that works on the fitness game. When I see Leonard closing down on those, like on a flurry of punches, my question in my head, I'm like, okay, I wonder, so what were they doing to do that extra thing? Because I know how it is when I've trained with champions and I make sure that I click into the last, to give them that last burst or 10 seconds or so of that extra energy. And then my question is, how much of it is actual conditioning and how much of it is, in the nut? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think with Leonard there's probably a lot to do with these minor combinations. Leonard was in his prime, he was an absolute genius in the ring. And the one time he let his genius slip was the first fight against Duran when he got suckered and drawn into the fight that he shouldn't have been fighting. But he had 2 fights after that with Duran and he proved who the boss was.
But Joe, we got to give Duran props for coming back for fight 3 though. Because the way fight 2 was, it was like why? I was like, what you mean no mas, bruh? We came to the mas.
Yeah, well, the thing was that at that point, people thought that the no mas situation with Duran would define who he was as a fighter, but it didn't, because he came back and he won another two versions of a legit championship against Davey Moore, stopping him in Madison Square Garden, and then of course in 1989, the ring upset and fight of the year is when he, I don't know if it was the upset, but it was definitely fight of the year. Ring Magazine's 1989 when he beat Iran Barkley for the WBC version of the middleweight title. I believe Duran at that stage was 36. I mean, that's just incredible, incredible. And Barkley was the guy who stopped, Hearns to win the title. And then obviously before that, Tommy Hearns sparked Duran out in 2 rounds. So, Duran wasn't expected to win the fight, but he did. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that no mas situation kind of tainted him at that point of his career, but it certainly didn't define who he was as a fighter because he's an all-time great. And Nat Fleischer, the founder of Ring Magazine, once said that he thought that Duran was the greatest lightweight of all time. And I have to agree with that. I think Duran was the greatest lightweight of all time in boxing history.
But this just goes to show you that it takes a team to create a champion. You need good people around you. You're basically the sum total of the 5 people or so that are around you. You need a good trainer, coaches, managers, people around you that are speaking the truth to you so that you don't get caught up in the illusion. So we've, episode 1, we had Muhammad Ali. Today we had Sugar Ray. Dude, who do we go to next week? This is so many. We got Hagler, we got Hearns. What other champion? I mean, you got to knock the kings off here. What do you guys think?
We can always talk about... Well, we had a question earlier with Matt, and I mentioned the name Manny Pacquiao. I think, maybe let's fast forward several years and let's talk about, maybe Manny Pacquiao. It's up to you. Whatever you guys want to talk about, I'm happy to.
But remember, we're going to have to, whether you like him or not, we're going to eventually have to talk about Mayweather. We're going to have
absolutely.
Great. So, so next week...
let's do Manny Pacquiao.
Let's go Manny, because... and he's such a gentleman as well. So we go to Pacquiao next week. So guys, if you just joined us, unfortunately, this is all we have time for. But follow the channel. This is at Picasso Live. This is Upfront with Caz, Inside the Ring. I will be editing the show, throwing it up onto YouTube, sharing it onto Twitter, Facebook. Colin will share it as well. This is an ongoing series every Tuesday, 1 p.m. right here. Follow Caz Abrams, One Up Productions. But also this live video will be going for the next 24 hours. 24 hours on my channel. Last words, Colin, to any upcoming boxers, words of inspiration as we in lockdown.
Yeah, look, I I think the most important thing right now is because boxing and the boxing gyms and sporting events are all on a level 1. And as miserable as it is for all of us, there's no point in staying miserable. There's no point in being negative. COVID-19 is beyond our control. I think we need to sit, assess, and just figure out what's important to us. Keep the vision going, and the vision is obviously to get back in the ring, all of us, and obviously do what we do best in every aspect of this of boxing. And just use this time wisely. I can't keep saying it enough. Use this time wisely. We've got the time. Let's connect with our family. Let's connect with our friends. Let's do creative things like Caz and I are doing on a Tuesday. Obviously, we all love boxing. We want it to get back to normal as fast as we can. But again, it's a process that we can't control. So just stay positive and think of the good things instead of trying to be negative as to what's going on in the world. You know, we're all in the same boat. And we're all here to help one another. So if I can just say stay safe and stay home, and obviously just adhere to the levels issued by the government of South Africa. And I'll see you guys next week Tuesday.
I think in closing, like some of our greatest fighters have always failed forward. Is the daughter there? Let her say bye.
Hold on, and my daughter wants to say bye.
Bye, baby.
Say bye. She's not saying bye. Cheers, guys.
See you next week, bro. Peace out. Right, for me, Caz, Colin, we'll see you next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. same time. Next week, we talk about manufacturing. Hey, Caz, what's up? God bless you. God bless your families. One up.